Brittany Maynard was a California resident. She was 29 years old when she was diagnosed with a brain tumor in January of 2014, and the doctors gave her 6 months to live. And so she moved from her house in Anaheim, California, to Colorado, where the Death with Dignity Act was enacted and legal. So basically what that is Oregon offers residents of Oregon who are facing a terminal illness with physician-assisted suicide, which is the prescription by a doctor of a lethal dosage of a medication that will basically put them to rest when and where they wish. So she decided to make that decision, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today, that controversy of physician-assisted suicide, and hopefully give you a different outlook on the subject. So during my speech, I'm going to talk about, firstly, background information, so what is physician-assisted suicide, and the process by which patients have to go through to ultimately make that decision and actually follow through with it. And then secondly, I will be discussing ethics regarding the subject. And yeah, so hopefully I can show you how physician-assisted suicide really isn't a matter of controversy, but rather a matter of empathy. And so my purpose is, I believe that physician-assisted suicide should be legal on a federal level, not just in the states where it's currently legal. So what is physician-assisted suicide? As I kind of already defined it, it's the prescription to a lethal dose of medication to a terminally ill patient. American citizens have the right to die in 6 states, including California, Oregon, Vermont, Colorado, DC, and Washington, DC, so 6 states. And as Valerie Richardson from the Washington Times states, Oregon became the first state to legalize assisted suicide for the terminally ill, mentally competent adults in 1994. So, out of all 50 states, only 6 states offer this to terminally ill patients. So now I'm going to talk about the process by which patients have to undergo. So in order to even have this as a viable option for yourself, you have to be terminally ill and given 6 months left to live by a physician, and you have to be at least 18 years old. So only adults can choose physician-assisted suicide. So when you request the medication, you have to request it to your physician twice orally. So you have to ask them, like, doctor, this is what I want. Is it possible? Will you give me the prescription? And then the doctor will say yes or no, basically. Then the patient must ask a 3rd time in a written form, and that written form has to be signed by 2 separate witnesses. So 2 people have to sign the form, and then it's turned into the doctor or the physician, and the physician decides whether he approves it or not. If he does approve it, the case then goes to a 2nd physician, and the 2nd physician has to review the case and then approve it as well. So it goes through 2 doctors before it's approved. Once it is approved, the first doctor must prescribe the medicine to the recipient or the patient, and the patient must then go to the pharmacy and pick it up themselves and take it themselves. Doctors are not allowed to administer the medication to the patient, because then that would be considered euthanasia and not physician-assisted suicide. So they're 2 completely different things. So once the patient picks up the prescription, they then have obviously the liberty to go whenever they want and wherever they want. In most cases, patients choose to go in their house, surrounded by their loved ones, which obviously is a much better alternative than, I don't know, let's say in a hospital bed when they're connected to a life support system or something like that. So it gives them that level of comfort. Physicians have every right to deny any patient that they deem like mentally unstable if they show any signs of psychological, I guess, like any psychological problems, the doctors can send them to a psychologist and have them be evaluated, and then the psychologist would then determine if they're fit or not. So it's very safe, it's very thorough, it prevents a lot of malpractice, a lot of coercion is obviously taken out of the equation with all of these steps. Also, just to add, before the doctor approves, according to State Magazine, the doctor also must tell the patient about alternatives like hospice care, advise him to confer with his family or next of kin, and remind them that it's okay to change their mind at any time. So that's basically the process. Now I'm going to talk more deeply into the ethics and what I believe should be taken into consideration. We as human beings empathize. We see someone suffering and we obviously can't bear, especially if it's a loved one. So although we hopefully will never come across the situation or know anybody who does, it's important to still keep in mind that this is a reality that some people face, and I believe that they should have options. Like, it's not saying that every terminally ill patient is going to choose this, but it's simply an option that I think the government should offer to those who need it. Because as Brittany Maynard, whom I previously mentioned, stated, she was a PSA advocate, by the way. She devoted the rest of her 6 months to not only make the most of her life, but also devote herself to advocate for this. She stated, "I do not want to die, but I am dying, and I want to die on my own terms," which I think is really important to keep in mind, that this isn't just a scenario, it's actually people who have to go through it. So, in conclusion, physician-assisted suicide should be legalized on a federal level because it is safe and is only an option to terminally ill patients. And also, I believe that physician-assisted suicide is the most ethical option because it allows terminally ill people some peace of mind. So lastly, as Carol Parrott from deathwithdignity.org stated, "If you are terminally ill, the option to die a peaceful death at a time and place of your choosing provides you with invaluable peace of mind, which is especially important at the end of life." Thank you.
Karen, by any chance are you here and can tell us what you thought?
There's people waiting outside.
That's a good place for them to be, but the answer is no. All right. Well, let me tell you what I thought about the speech, and then we'll try and wave at those people when it's time for them to come in. You start with a well-known example. I think that's pretty good. I think you could probably get a little bit more emotional resonance out of that story, both at the beginning of the speech and at the end of the speech, although I did think that the quote that Brittany Maynard provided you toward the end of the speech was pretty good. There was a little bit of confusion at the beginning of the speech about where she ended up, whether it was Oregon or Colorado. I thought that was not a big deal, but you want to make sure that you're consistent, because I think it is Oregon that she ended up in, and you mentioned Colorado, and I thought that was a little awkward. The subject's identified, but your exact position on the subject is not very clear. It takes you almost 2 minutes to get to the point where you, in essence, say that you support the idea of this primarily because you want to be empathetic with people. The next 4 minutes of the speech is all a description of how the procedure works in those states that have this procedure, and there's a lot of technical explanation about what the rules and the steps that somebody has to go through are, without much explanation about why you have those rules. And I think that some of the reasons that they have those rules are the reasons that people resist the notion that this should be available. That people who are depressed might be taking advantage of this. That people who aren't really terminal might choose to use a medical tool for committing suicide, and they don't really have these needs. I think what's missing here is a stronger argument on the need. You assume that people are suffering and that they have no alternative without demonstrating that there is no alternative. Most people with pain and suffering might be able to be medicated. There are plenty of ways to make them comfortable. They can have a lot of autonomy. The idea that somebody should be able to control their own decision making, that is, I think, a good argument for you to develop, but you only mentioned it briefly, and you don't really build a big ethical argument for it. You just kind of suggest that that's the position that you're taking. So I think you need a stronger development of that particular position. Delivery issues, I think you actually did a very good job on all of that stuff. You are talking to us. You're not dependent on the notes. There's good variety in your voice. Your movements seem purposeful, and you seem engaged when you're talking. I just think that you need to build more of an argument and less of an informative speech about what the procedures are for getting access to physician-assisted suicide. All right, thank you.